Gideon had a hard time sleeping that night. All that went through his mind in his dreams were sounds of swords clanging together, flashes of light, and people on the ground. Every now and then he'd wake up, stirring and shouting out. His wife would keep telling him to go back to sleep, everything would be okay. But he had this feeling that nothing was going to be okay. He couldn't shake it. All that was going through his mind was 300 men. How does God expect me to use only 300 men to go up against this mighty army and actually win? But not just 300 men, only go with certain objects. Gideon fell back asleep and tossed and turned, and then finally he got into a fitful night's sleep. Just about dawn, he was woken up by hearing his name once again, and even that kind of worried him, because he heard this: "Gideon, warrior of God, wake up and get going." Made him sit up straight and look around, not sure who exactly was talking to him because his wife was still asleep. So he thought he'd maybe get a few more minutes of sleep in, but sleep didn't come. So he said, well, I can at least get ready for the day. And he got his things ready and met his family for breakfast, knowing that there was work that needed to be done. But he had a feeling that work wasn't going to be done that day. As they finished up breakfast and as he was washing the breakfast dishes, he was praying all along, asking for wisdom as far as what God was having him to do and what exactly this was going to mean, not just for him, but even more so for his family. Because Gideon was very scared that if something happened to him, something even worse would happen to his family. So he went and he told his family goodbye as he left their family farm and went out to the field outside of town that he told the 300 men to meet him at that afternoon. They met him there and they all sat down on the grass as Gideon was talking to them, and he said, "Men, I know that many of you are going to look at me and laugh at me when I share this with you, but God spoke to me again." They looked at him and said, "Well, we're here, so there's no reason to laugh at you because we believe what God has told you." And he said, "No, man, you don't get it. What God actually told me to do is we're only supposed to go into battle with two things." And they all looked at him, eyebrows raised, waiting for something silly to be said. And Gideon said, "All that we can go into battle with is a torch, and over that, a clay pot for a covering." They looked at him and chuckles started going through the crowd. And, "Oh, you got to be joking, Gideon." He said, "No, this is what God has told me. That at the moment that he tells us that we were to go, we break the pots, the light will shine, and he's going to do the rest of the work." This just sounded really crazy, really silly. Only going into battle without what you need to be able to fight. This is not something that we would do. We need to make sure we have swords and spears and shields. And he looked at them and he reminded them, remember what we've been told. Remember what we've been taught. That God is our sword. God is our shield. God is our protector. And he said, here's what I want us to do. And they were sitting there waiting for this immense speech where Gideon was going to rile them up, getting them ready for war. And he said, what I want us to do is I want us to break up into groups and I want us to pray. They weren't used to this because Yeah, they do it at home, but in a group? No, no. This was something too new. But they said, well, never hurts to at least try something. So they broke up in groups and they prayed together for several hours. Then Gideon looked at him and he said, okay, now what I want you to do, I want you to go home, be with your families, have supper, get a few hours of sleep tonight, and then I want you to meet me back here at this field at 11 p.m. I'll give you some more instructions once we get here. All the men looked at each other and said, Gideon's kind of going crazy, it feels like, but God's speaking to him, so obviously we need to follow what he's saying. They go home and they tell their separate families what's going on, and the families were really scared because in their minds they're thinking, if something happens to our dad, our husband, our brother, that means this immense army is going to come and they're going to wipe us out. Little did they realize that Jesus himself was standing in every single household listening to this, putting his hand on each shoulder, comforting them, telling them that things were going to be all right, and that the victory would be given in a way that they could never imagine. Supper came, nighttime came, men got a few hours of sleep, and they got up, ready to walk to the field where Gideon told them to meet. Little did they know about what God was going to be doing in the next couple hours. They got to the field, everything was dark. To say that it was dark would be an understatement because there was no moon, there was no stars out, nothing was shining. It was pitch black. They could barely see each other in front, they could barely see their hands in front of them. But at the same time, they knew that God was with them because they could see the light of his presence guiding their way. They got to the field and Gideon told them to crouch down in a circle so they could talk before they went on. Gideon said, men, here's what we're going to do. We're going to back up off of this field and we're going to light our torches, and then what I want you to do is I want you to place the jar right over your torch. And at the moment that you hear me cry out, I want you to break your clay pots, and I want you to say this, for Gideon and the armies of God. They thought that was funny. What armies of God? We're only 300 men. Do you have a mouse in your pocket, Gideon? What are you talking about? Gideon looked at him and he said, this is what God told me to say. And all of a sudden, every single man there felt a peace that they couldn't even understand, but a peace that later generations would be written about, a peace that passes all understanding. They knew Jesus was with them, and they knew everything was going to be okay. So they went outside the field and they lit their torches and they put the pots on top, and they quietly went around the hillsides and up this small mountain to the other side where the major army was camped. Now, the army was asleep at that point in time. Even those that were supposed to be on guard were sleeping at their posts. Gideon and some of the soldiers chuckled, knowing that those people, if they were still alive, would be chastised the next day because they fell asleep at their post. They didn't even know that, that Gideon and his soldiers were actually right there at the very gates to their little camp. They stopped and they prayed, and they felt that peace once again, knowing that God was in control and that God had a reason for them being here, and that everything was going to be not just okay, it was going to work out for the best situation it could ever be. So they very quietly crept up that small little hill and started down, Gideon gave the signal, and they broke their pots, and they said, "For Gideon and the armies of God." Now the soldiers down below didn't even know what to do. All of a sudden there was a great light that encompassed the whole camp. And they saw this light running towards them faster and faster and faster. There was so much confusion in the camp that the soldiers didn't know who they were fighting. The soldiers started fighting each other and killing each other, to where there ended up only being a very small group of the massive army left that ran back to their nation to report to their king what had just happened. When Gideon and the small army saw this, they stopped and they praised God, and they spent some time in prayer, saying, "Oh Lord, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for what you have done. You have delivered us in ways that we could never imagine, but even in ways that we already know that you already had plans." Now, as this happened, they realized that the sun was just coming up over the horizon. And Gideon knew that they needed to get the men back to the camp as quickly as possible. And as they were heading back home to their separate homes, they made sure to tell the leaders in the cities, "Hey, this vast army, they're no more. Also, there is still stuff on the battlefield. Go, pick it up. Pick the food up. Pick the spoils up. Go and live. God has provided us a way to be able to live yet another day." The whole nation was so excited because God was still at work. They couldn't even imagine that God was going to do this, let alone use someone like Gideon where they didn't even think he was anything. But God continued to use Gideon in amazing ways that they never expected. Gideon's family didn't expect it either. Neither did Gideon. But Gideon, for the rest of his life, continued to remember that. Continued to remember how God called him Gideon, warrior of God. But it wasn't just that one time that God called him that. God called him that on a daily basis, because that's who God was making Gideon to be. You know, it's interesting as we talk about that. God calls each one of us to the same. He doesn't call us like he called Gideon to go out and get people together and go to war against a nation or a group of people. But what God does call us to is he says, "I've called you to be a warrior of mine, to battle against the dark presence in this day, to stand up and to tell people that you love me even though they don't and they will not share my name. But also I've called you to be a living example that when others see you, they see me. So take your torch, take your pots, get ready to call out my name, call out for my strength, because when I send you into battle, things will happen. You're not going to fight. I will fight for you. But when that happens, amazing things will happen because I am using you."